Hello everyone, my name is Paul Hurley. Welcome to this video tour of my layout. I live in Baden, Ontario, and appreciate the fact that the Doubleheaders has once again made all of our layouts available to you through remote access. So my layout's built for operations, and what does that mean? Well, it means that I can work with my layout and the trains on it rather than simply watching them run around the room. And I've enjoyed it a lot because of the extra level of involvement it gives me in my hobby. We're going to be doing some closer examination of just what operations mean. So let's get started.
This is a block of freight cars sitting in coal yard. They're going to be heading out eastbound later the same day. This first up is a bulkhead flat car carrying pipe. This regular flat car also carrying pipe. Both would be from Welland Pipe and Tube in Welland, Ontario. This next car is a specialty hopper car. It is air pressurized for handling powdered material. In this case, it's been loaded with flour from the Robin Hood mill in Port Colborne, Ontario. And lastly is a plug door box car. It's carrying the labels or brand for Lehigh Valley, but in actual fact is now a Conrail car, with Lehigh Valley being one of the railroads that had been amalgamated to form Conrail in the late 1970s. It's likely carrying general commodities. Next, we're going to see a very basic operation move. The TH&B road switcher that's been working the coal yard in Welland, number 73, is going to lift or pull a specialty hopper car called a carbon black car and take its load over to Welland to the Union Carbide plant. But first, the switcher has to pick up a caboose. One length, half, 20. So the switcher has dropped its caboose. And is now approaching the Union Carbide siding.
So let's take a look at the layout, shall we? So here you are at the doorway into the room, and it's really important that you read the signs as you're going in for safety purposes. Otherwise, you could start with a headache. If you pop up over the duck under, no pun intended, you'll see the room in almost its entirety. You'll notice that the ceiling and the walls have all been finished. This is my second layout, and one of the bits of advice I learned before my first one was the importance of closing off your ceiling. That prevents dust from coming down from the floors above as people walk across them, but it also helps with sound protection for those outside of the train room, and also improves the illumination because it gives you more reflective surface. The teeth-like structure that you see down the right side of the upper deck and down back is the bracing for the fascia. It's not been added yet. One of the projects for the spring of 2022 will be the addition of LED rope lighting around the upper deck, the underneath of the upper deck. So let's move into the room, shall we, and get a sense of the physical layout. This is what you're seeing, 22 feet long, 6 feet wide, obviously much wider where you see this area in the upper left. There's a pocket door to conserve space at the entranceway, and the helix is located behind view blocks going from the lower to the upper deck. So what do we mean by a layout designed for operations? Well, philosophy is kind of a big word, but it has some basic principles. One of the phrases that you'll hear railroaders talk about, model railroaders, is prototypical or prototype. Essentially, that means that I'm modeling something that was in the real world, an actual railroad, as opposed to another term you'll hear, which is freelance. And that's where we essentially make up what is going to be on our layout. The locations don't have to be actual locations in the real world or ones that were serviced by train. We can make up our own railroad company. We can have other actual ones join them or not. But the notion is that it's the output of your creativity. Operational essentially means that you're going to use whatever layout that you've created, whether it's prototypical or freelanced, but you're going to try to actually use it like a railroad. And in order to do that, when you're planning your track layout, you need to have a number of very key elements. My first layout was in a room that was 10 by 12 and it had an awful lot of open area. A lot of modelers, particularly new modelers, seem to enjoy doing scenery. But in order to have an operational layout, you need customers, you need yards, sidings, and spurs, and it would be nice, but not essential, that you'd have one or more what are called a runaround. By operational, what do we mean? Well, when I suddenly realized that I could do more with the layout than I'd done before, and I could actually operate it, it meant that I could actually use my layout, actually work with it, not only while it was being constructed, but afterward. There's a social aspect to it I like very much. COVID's obviously put a damper on a lot of this, but the notion of getting together with a number of people and being able to work together with the layout is a way of connecting ourselves to others. And some of us like that more than some, but operating gives us a basis for doing that within our hobby. There's a lot of learning opportunity, and that can be a lot of fun as you get into your layout as well, whether it's fictional, freelance, or prototypical. And then there's the challenge. I found operating on a number of layouts in other people's homes and at clubs that the operational aspect of it was akin to having a 3D moving puzzle. So what would an operational model railroad do with a scene like this from the 1970s for what was an acid train, unit train that CP and TH&B together ran between Port and Maitland down on Lake Erie and Coppercliff up in Sudbury? Well, here's my version of it. So indeed, let's go into the room, shall we? So you've come through the doorway under the duck under, and you're standing where this avatar is right now. My right hand is on the lower deck. It's 42 inches off the floor. Just off my right elbow and continuing on behind me, you will see what is an incline, and that has a number of purposes. Initially, it was to reduce the height of the helix, but it also is a great stand-in for the Niagara Escarpment, which is a dominant geographical feature if you've ever been in the Hamilton area. And it certainly was a key feature that the TH&B had to negotiate every time it went to Buffalo. Off of my right shoulder is the upper deck. It's at 62 inches off the floor. Higher up in the back corner, behind my right shoulder, you'll see the initial scratch build construction of the Robin Hood flour mill that was is in Port Colborne. So that's one of the customers on the layout. And continuing, if you look just off of my left arm, you'll see at about my bicep the incline continuing across and out into where the helix is. That has a swing down gate to make it easier to get into the room. And just off of my left elbow, you'll see the backside of a swing in gate, and it allows a track to move from the right to the left-hand side of the lower deck. So the only duck under to get into the room is at 62 inches, which as we get older is much more convenient and easier on the back. So if you're standing where I am right now, and we're going to turn 180 degrees, this is what you're going to see. So on your left side is Fisher Yard, quite a large yard. It had the function of marshaling cars in and out of the main industrial area in Hamilton. Off into the left-hand side even further, about 4 feet deep and about 3 feet across, is a large series of yards for Stelco. There's track feeding 4 different mills, one of which you can just see above the label. There's also material yards, scrap yards, and then off to the left, but nevertheless back in this area, is one of the blast furnaces that is in the process of being installed. In addition to the Fisher Yard proper, this scene also has 2 other bits of trackage. The National Steel Car Company, a major customer of Stelco for steel, and of course manufacturer of rolling stock in Canada for decades. That track is protected under masking tape for some work that I was doing at the time. And next to it is an industrial spur. And if you kind of follow it all the way back behind the word spurs in the text in the picture, there are 4 separate industry locations that will eventually be filled out in that area. Over on your right-hand side, also on the lower level, are 2 other yards. Kinnear is essentially the main hub for the entire layout. It is really the control center and everything coming in both from the Hamilton industrial area of various large companies, but also coming in from Toronto and ultimately from Buffalo and Niagara Falls, New York, would come through Kinnear Yard on this layout. In the foreground is Chatham Yard. Because of compression, there are lots of things we couldn't include. But by the engine, you will see a cutout area. That's going to be the location of the old coaling tower. We'll see a picture of it later on in a prototypical photograph. And it, as you can see from the captioning on the right-hand side, is essentially an engine servicing facility in the 1980s. The incline is here. Coil Yard is directly above Kinnear Yard on the upper deck. And as it indicates in the text, it serviced all the various feeder industries in Welland, which was a very large industrial hub up in through the mid 1980s. The recession at the beginning of the 80s really hollowed out a lot of, in particular, the small steel industry that was in Welland, but there were lots and lots of other customers as well. Down in the very back of the Welland, you'll just see, if you can see my cursor, this is a little hole and it goes through the wall into the adjacent room. And this line, as you can see, represents another bit of trackage uh, going to Port Colborne. So if you went through that little hole in the wall that I was pointing out, this takes you to a shelf staging yard in the gym, which has 5 tracks and a fairly good capacity. Think of a staging yard as being like the wings of a theatrical stage. There's a lot that goes on that is out of sight, but when you want to bring something in this case, a train, it's already made up, and it's just a matter of finding it in the right track. There is another staging yard that you'll see just a very rudimentary picture of that's located underneath the helix, and it serves the as the stand-in for the St. John CP yard in Toronto. So this winter we added some remote cameras so we could see the progress of trains in the helix. Otherwise, it's pretty much blocked from view by the backdrops in the foreground. If you look in the black and white photograph on the left, you'll see some of the work that's being done on that John Street yard. And as you can see from the text, we also are in the process of installing infrared occupancy detectors to make sure that we don't inadvertently have a train leaving the layout and going into a siding that is already occupied. These mini cameras are quite slick. There's lots of different brands on the market. We happen to choose one from a subsidiary of Amazon called Blink that was on deep discount this winter. And what's really cool about it is I was out in British Columbia visiting family before Christmas, and I suddenly one day, for whatever reason, got an alert. They have motion detectors built into them, so they're not always on. And I got a photograph of an empty room, but it works. So it picks up the trains when they start moving around the circle of the helix. So let's take a look at some structures that are on the layout. This particular shot is intriguing because of the next one. And I'll just, by way of showing you something I've been working on, talk a little bit about some of the support that's out there for modelers. If you are new to the hobby, or if you're somebody like me who's just gotten back into it about 7 years ago in my case, one of the things that you might well consider is joining a model railroad group. Certainly the Doubleheaders in the Kitchener-Waterloo area are a vigorous, very active group that do a lot of things, both in the community at large, but also for modelers. I'm also a member of the NMRA, and this kit was built by 22 modelers across the province of Ontario, linking up for 2 sessions in January and February. We got this kit on a really deep, wonderful discount from the manufacturer in Southern Ontario called ITLA. And it was a wonderful opportunity to motivate each other. And I learned a lot from other modelers as well as from the key people that were leading the session. Here's another shot of my kit before I started to close it up. All of the details that you see on the inside, the framing, etc., are all scratch built. And partly these were from ideas that I was getting from others, as well as the reading that we do. So if you're looking for support, ways to learn, I can't recommend enough to you that you might want to join one of these or any other group that are in the Kitchener-Waterloo and Southern Ontario areas. And I've provided the NMRA link down below. For the rest of this, I'll just run this as a gallery and you can read the text as the pictures scroll before you. What's great about these mini print figures is their detail, and also it's a Canadian company based in Toronto. Just started up in the last 2 years during COVID-19. This is a scene area on the upper deck that has been enhanced over the past winter. So what do we mean by operations and running a model train like an operational prototype? By the way, in this picture, you'll see this large structure in the background, just sort of middle of the picture. That is that coal tower that I was referring to in Chatham Yard. The roundhouse that's in the background behind it was demolished, I think, in the late 1980s, early 1990s. So one of the things you're going to want to do if you would like to have a model train layout that's going to be used operational, and it can be any size. It could be a small corner of a bedroom or a room downstairs, or it could be an entire basement. The notion is that you want to operate it. Well, in my case, it's a little easier because I chose to follow a prototype, a real railroad. So with a little bit of research, I was able to flush out a list like this. And what's helpful about this is when you get a sense of what activity is going on at any single point in time on your layout, it helps you to answer the question, how much power am I going to need? One of the really cool things that I began to learn about the area that I was modeling and the kind of work that the TH&B did was to find out just all the various raw materials, inputs, as well as things that were being shipped out by rail. And this, of course, creates activity on your layout. One of the really interesting things that I began to see is the synergies or the relationships between different businesses that I'd chosen to include on my layout. One of the great ones was discovering that the American can plant received a lot of tin plate coming in from the United States in especially climate controlled cars through the Southern Railroad. And once it produced its tin cans, all the scrap was a potential input to the steel industry in Hamilton, but it first had to be detinned. So there's a small business that has existed in the waterfront of Hamilton for years called metal and thermite. So there's this movement between them. And of course, from metal and thermite, you have a detinned scrap going off to Stelco. The other thing that I began to realize and learn that in my previous layout had no idea of was that certain specialty products require different kinds of cars. So one that I showed you near the beginning of this tour, Robin Hood Flour Mill, I discovered that just like you and I discover when we open a package of cereal, that things settle. Well, in the case of flour moving around in a hopper car, the flour tends to settle and pack. So it was initially very, very difficult to unload either a box car or later on hopper cars with flour. And what they came up with as an innovation was to blow in air, and in some cases actually have bladders that inflated within the cars and squeezed the content out. But those hopper cars visually look different on the outside than a normal hopper car that would carry gravel, grain, things like that. Well, operating layouts need people doing things, and here's two people busily working on the layout going back a number of years ago. One of the decisions I had to make was how was I going to organize all this? I did a lot of reading, but I also did some guest operating work on different people's layouts as well as some clubs. And at the end, I came down to a system that is available through a software provided through the NMRA organization, and it's called JMRI. And there's my reasons why I eventually chose it, as opposed to probably the even more popular way of doing it, which is car card. Car cards have been around for many, many decades. But software has its advantages. These are some of the outputs that you get. So you have to list all of the locations on your layout in order to start the preparation and organizing. And that's really true of any system. If you're going to operate, you have to organize how your layout is planned and put together. GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. You need knowledge and information. So all of your cars are going to be inventoried. Car card systems do it one way. Spreadsheets are how it's done in JMRI. And ultimately, you get this, a switch list. And when I looked at this one originally, when putting together the tour last year for the doubleheader, I noticed here in the upper corner, this was the date of the very last pre-COVID lockdown operating sessions that we've had. And as of today, I'm recording this at the end of February. We still have yet to have an operating session on the layout. Well, thank you for taking the time to visit the layout, and we hope that you have fun with the rest of the tour and working on your own layouts. All the very best. Bye-bye.